And that's where I got to say that I kind of cheated. And I think that if you get into one of these, you should probably cheat as much as you can as well. Are coding reality shows now a thing? What's it like to be on one? And yeah, that's really me on one right there. And how do you do well on one? And are these shows really a good idea? Well, let's get into it. So the first question you're probably asking is, how real is it? And I would say it's pretty real. In total, we had 4 hours to build an app, and we did just that. Production was about 6 hours in total, and that was really compressed into about 20 minutes of video. So there's obviously a lot of cutting there, but we did build those apps. Now, there was no script. There was a run of show. You actually get to see that pretty early on in the video. And so you've got some segments in there that have a certain amount of time. There's intro, then there's 30 minutes to design, then there's 4 hours to build, and then the review. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. So about 2 months before the production, Jason reached out and said, hey, would you like to be on 4 Devs, 1 App? And I'm like, heck yeah. And he told me that the sponsor was DataStax, and we'd be using their Astra DB vector database. And the idea was to...
don't build another chatbot.
Exactly. So vector databases are used in chatbots all the time. So what can we do that's outside of that to really demonstrate the vector database on its own? What Jason didn't say was that this production was going to be huge. And when I got to his Portland studio, which is actually good for me since I actually live in Portland, I was like, whoa, because there were 2 camera operators there and a sound person, and I'm getting all mic'd up. And for a guy who sits in front of a green screen at home for his videos, this is like a freaking TV show. And that wasn't actually a surprise, really, since Jason's always wanted to make a tech TV show. I just didn't know that this was going to be the first one, season 1, episode 1 of that show. So we get all mic'd up and everything, and there are 4 competitors. There's Jason, Lizzie, Chance, and myself. And then there's also Carter from DataStax. And the first part of the video is Jason and Carter going over the show. And then we went to the whiteboard, and Carter walked us through what a vector database was. And I got to be honest, I think this is actually part of the video that could be cut out and replaced with about 30 seconds of an illustrated walkthrough on how those work. I think that would work better than just having someone at the whiteboard, but that's just me. And then the next 30-minute block was planning out what we actually wanted to build. And that's where I got to say that I kind of cheated. And I think that if you get into one of these, you should probably cheat as much as you can as well. And what do I mean when I say I cheated? Well, I actually didn't know a lot about vector databases 2 months prior, but I figured, hey, if I'm going to show up on a show about vector databases, I better know what one of those is. So I spent a lot of time on YouTube and on blogs reading about what a vector database is. I actually tried out AstraDB before I got there to actually try it out myself to see how it worked. So I was pretty prepared going in. I also figured out what I was going to do for the challenge and made sure that I had all the data that I needed. And that's really the big takeaway for me. If you're going to get into a reality show like this, prepare. Take whatever they give you before you get there and prepare. That's going to give you a whole lot of confidence going in. It's just going to make the whole thing go a whole lot easier. Now, another good way to prepare for a show like this, or just get better at coding in general, is to read articles, follow along with videos and tutorials like I did. But where do you find those? And how do you keep up to date with all that? Well, I use daily.dev for that. It's your one-stop shop for all the high-quality developer content that you've been looking for. You can maintain your own reading list. You can join squads around hot topics like Next.js, Node, Rust, Astro, and more. And more importantly, you can advertise your content on daily.dev like I do. I get asked all the time, how do I get noticed as an engineer? And my advice is always the same. Give back to the community with open source or by writing articles or posting videos. Build content. And how do you get that content noticed? Well, you go to daily.dev. It's free. They've got apps for iOS and Android. It's, of course, in your browser. It's the best way to stay up to date with all things web development and more. All right, so what had I prepared in advance? Well, I knew that I was going to make a Dungeons & Dragons application. I thought Dungeons & Dragons is very cool lately, and it actually honestly fits in well with a vector database. all of the stats for monsters and players are effectively just a vector. And so it's pretty easy to come up with an application that would go and take a list of players, then find the right monsters for those players, and then to pass that information on to OpenAI to get an encounter, which I think is actually pretty cool. And I've had people ask me for it since, so I think it's actually got some legs on it, but I digress. The next part was to actually build it. So we got two 2-hour blocks of time. And in that time, there were a bunch of segments where we were taken out into the street and asked, how are we doing? And that's actually when I thought, you know what? I need to add a little bit of drama to this. So I essentially improvised and said that I'd seen everybody kind of freak out and I was feeling really good. And I guess that was partially true. I was certainly feeling pretty good. It didn't seem like everybody was totally freaking out, but and I think it's another thing you want to do when you get into one of these reality videos is kind of play up the drama a little bit. That certainly helps you get some screen time, and it certainly makes it a lot easier on the editors to edit around those drama points that kind of increase engagement in the video. Now, in terms of actually building out the app, I was pretty much done within the first 30 minutes or so, because all I really needed to do was solve for a few unknowns. How to get my data into the database, which was incredibly easy. Actually, Astra makes it very easy to preload a database. They're not sponsoring this content, but it really is genuinely pretty easy. And then I needed to go and actually run some numbers against it and see if it actually provided some decent results, which it did. So at that point, it was really just kind of putting a Next.js UI on it, adding features as I went. So I felt pretty good. And I think that's actually another good piece of advice is get your unknowns down to the point where you can get those right out of the way up front. And then after that, you're essentially just incrementally building on that application. And you don't really have to worry about if you're done or not. You're kind of always in a state of done. So we got through our 4 hours. There was actually a little bit extra time because some folks hadn't completely finished it, but I think it was only about an extra 10 minutes or so. But we actually had this one improv moment where we decided, you know what, we should do this slow-mo walk. And that ended up making its way into the video, which is also pretty good because they added a voiceover over that segment. It looked really slick in the video. And it was just fun to kind of improvise like that when you have a crew available to you to go and create shots like that. As a content creator, it is amazing to have other folks behind the camera that you can just bounce ideas off and say, hey, what about this shot? What about that shot? And you get the shot and it's like, wow, that looks pretty awesome. And then it was down to what I guess would be the judging in a contest show, but this was more of a kind of challenge show. So we're just kind of demoing what we've done. And everybody did great. I showed off my Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Chance showed off his stuff when it comes to Bob's Burgers. Lizzie showed off her Star Wars fanfic stuff. And Jason showed off his work when it came to looking through the comments of his Learn with Jason series and getting something out of it. His was, I guess, probably the most practical. I don't know if he's done anything with it since, but it seems like something that I would like being a YouTube creator. I would love to be able to look through all of your comments and go look for trends and concepts. And I think a vector database is fantastic for that. I think it was one more exit interview on the way out. I was just kind of overflowing saying, hey, this is great. This is a lot of fun. I don't think a lot of that ended up making it in the video. In fact, as I say, it was a 6-hour time period of video kind of condensed into about 20 minutes or so. So there's a lot of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor. After that, we had dinner at a nice local restaurant. Portland has awesome restaurants. And that was it. It was about 2 months later when I actually saw the completed result. It took about, I guess, 2 months to go and edit that into the completed form. So that's certainly something to think about when you take a video on of this magnitude. You've got multiple video streams, you got multiple audio streams, and you're trying to get that all into a condensed form. Very challenging, and it's going to take a lot of time. And not just that, it's probably going to take a lot of money. So should we actually do this? I'm going to start with the cons first because in my mind, the pros outweigh the cons, but I'll start with the cons first. And I think the cons in this case are that I think in particular, this particular format where you only have one dev with each app kind of overemphasizes the 10x programmer myth. And I don't think that's great. I think coding is ideally more of a team sport. And I would love to see, for example, a designer and a developer working together on something. And that would be a fantastic thing to show folks. The other thing I'm worried about is that we give a false impression for how long it would take to actually create a production application. Yeah, we created some kind of glue and hot wire type applications in 4 hours, but they were nowhere near production ready. So I don't want to have folks coming away from a show like this thinking, wow, it just takes 4 hours to build an app. That sounds easy. Now, when it comes to pros, this video has been uniquely successful for Jason's channel, and I don't think it was 100% tech folks that watched the video. I know that in my family, a whole bunch of folks who are not technical in the slightest watch the video because it's just a compelling watch. And I think that's good. We live in a technology-rich society. We use apps all the time. And I think it's good when folks understand kind of the basics of how those applications are built, the kind of folks that build them, the technologies and the tool sets and the skills that they have. I think that's a good thing for people to see. I also think it actually sets the bar pretty high for developers. I think watching other developers go and crank something out in a short period of time is actually pretty cool, and it's compelling and kind of sets the bar as to where you want to be. I'd love to hear from you if you want to see more reality content like this. It's certainly interesting to me, but I'd be curious to your take to see, is this devaluing our profession in your mind, or is this enhancing our profession? I would love to hear your feedback in the comments right down below. In the meantime, of course, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you really like to hit the subscribe button. And of course, I will be back next week with more tech-centered content, not just this opinion stuff. I'll see you next week.